Hey everybody, I'm Andy Hill, author of Scoring the Screen and Dean of the Film Scoring Academy of Europe. And I'm back for another round of the secrets of their success. And today we're going to talk about somebody who is an undeniable success. That is Alexandre Desplat. Now, Alexandre emerged in the early part of the new century, having spent quite a long time doing regional fare in France, films, television, etc. And some of you may remember a film called The Girl with the Pearl Earring. Well, that one kind of put him on the map. But if you really want to hear what put Alexandre Desplat on the radar screen, and this is an excellent way for us to begin to look at what his signature is, you have to listen to this one. Okay, that is the opening title from Jonathan Glazer's film Birth. And I suspect that if you haven't heard that before, you're sitting there thinking, I've never heard those particular sounds put together in that particular way before. The arrangement is unusual. The sonority is unusual. The absolute clarity and coherence of each instrument, each section, is unusual, almost like chamber music of a very new sort. Now, if you listen to the first lesson about James Newton Howard, then you know that what we're talking about here is signatures. And I am contending that basically all of you who wish to find yourselves doing what these gentlemen and all the people whose work you admire are doing need a signature. You need to find out what that is. Does it come from your history? Does it come from the instrument you play? Does it come from your culture or nationality or just your particular musical taste? In Desplat's case, the quality, the color of this cue has a lot to do with the fact that he is a woodwind player, specifically a flutist. We don't hear a lot of flutes used this way, with this kind of minimalistic figure in film music. That's one of the things that struck people about this cue. I was in Hollywood when this film was released. Very few people actually saw the movie, but within the industry itself, everybody sat up, pricked their ears, and said, "What's that? I haven't heard that before." And yet, a lot of what Alexandre did in this cue was musically familiar to anyone with even a basic knowledge of the concert repertoire. There's quite a lot of Tchaikovsky in this cue. And one of the things we hear that stands out as being kind of Tchaikovsky-like is Alexandre's very distinctive use of augmented harmony. Again, not something you hear a lot in film music. So my argument here in this very short little tutorial is that Alexandre, at the beginning of his career as an A-list film composer. He'd already been a film composer for some years. But when things really started to take off, it was a combination of factors that all came together in this particular piece of music. And one of the most substantial of those factors was his use of augmented harmony. Okay, as I bring up this logic session, I want to remark upon the fact that the career of a composer is very much built by early choices. But at some point, they get an indie film, a feature-length film, that allows them an opportunity to make a statement. And boy, the importance of that statement cannot be overestimated. If your statement is that you sound like everybody else, well, you're going to be consigned to that heap, and that is a very big heap. So you got to think long and hard about what you do. And I think Alexandre did on those early films. And he made some of the most distinctive statements any recent composer has made. Truth be told, he hasn't used them a lot recently because he's been doing Harry Potter films and Godzilla and things like that. So I grabbed some snippets from some of these early scores so that I could show you some of the most distinctive things he did. And these are all things that caused people in the industry and filmmakers to listen more closely to what he had to say. This first one is from Birth. I know that's a long sample, but I'll show you why in a second. Now, what's pulsing away in the background there is a pure sine wave. Again, like James Newton Howard's slide progression. Not the first time, it's a staple of electronic music, obviously, but in a dramatic film score, hearing it that foregrounded, really unusual choice. Here's another one. And still another one. Okay, what's going on there? We're hearing strings. It's more evident in the first sample than in the second, but these are both string samples. What are we hearing? What's all that? That is the sound of muted strings, con sordino, played very softly in a very large and ambient space, or with a ton of reverb and processing added. That's a Desplat signature. Massed strings, probably talking about a string orchestra of 60 or better, all strapped into mutes, playing no louder than mezzo piano, probably, on enormous stages. Now, let me show you what this combination of things begins to sound like. And what I did is I kind of made up a grab bag cue, including some of the major motifs from the Birth score, so that you could hear this stuff actually in practice. Okay, so you hear those augmented harmonies. In fact, that melody line descends to an augmented fifth before finally resolving. There's no chord progression here. There's no harmony in the typical sense. This is a very open arrangement. And keep in mind that the augmented fifth, if we're talking about C major, for example, that flat six or augmented fifth, whatever we choose to call that depending on the harmonic context, doesn't belong in the key of C major. So it's a vagrant tone. Very evocative. He's also doing a lot of chromatic stuff in there, which is the other part of Desplat's signature. But before we leave this behind, let me just remind you again of this. So I couldn't quite shave as much attack off that as I wanted to, but that's his motor. But just a lonely, pure sine wave like that, it's a pretty radical and inventive thing to do. Then we've got things happening like this. So simple, but so distinctive. What's he doing here? There's the tonic, D, up a whole step, down a minor third, to D flat, then up a fifth, amazing. Just those little chromatic figures. Again, enough to catch people's ears and make them say, what's happening there? Now let me very quickly play you what these cues sound like when they're fully realized by the orchestra. This particular track is called Sean School Tunnel. Okay, so let me ask you, flat out, would any of you have the audacity to leave something that naked? Alexandre Desplat, two-time Oscar-winning composer, genius, and on top of it all, French, and a player, a great flute player. He didn't need to do any more than this. I'm going to show you just a couple of other things that are also signatures of Desplat, and you're looking for signatures of similar strength. He is known for these quirky and often quite spare little chromatic melodies. The sort of things that you might look at and say, well, that's not enough. But in his case, it is enough. These are the melodies, by the way, that endeared him to Wes Anderson. Let me show you what it sounds like Best examples are from The Curious Case of Benjamin Button. And here's one called Postcards. Again, this is a mock-up so that you can hear the individual elements of the cue. Now that's all you need to know because that's basically the cue. Let me show you what this looks like. As you can see, we start with this broken chord figure in the harp, spelling out an E major chord, and oops, there we are with a C natural on top. So, back to augmented harmonies. And already that creates a slightly eerie mood. Then his melody here nothing unusual about that. Straight up the major scale. Nothing unusual about that. Ostinato continues. Second time we hear the melody. And now back to the major third. Wow. I mean, that's true genius when with such utter sort of Zen simplicity, you can make such a powerful statement. Let me play you one more. Okay, best I can do in a mock-up, but you get the message, right? Now look, nobody else sounds like that. That's why he gets hired. And this is early enough in his career that he's probably viewed by some studio and production company heads as a little bit of a risk. Who is this oddball French flutist who writes this kind of early 20th century Eric Satie, slightly Ravel-esque stuff? And why should we hire him? Well, the studio heads step aside for the directors, and particularly in a case where the director is David Fincher, as was the case with Benjamin Button. And suddenly you find everybody wants you. Everybody wants this thing that you do. This is how original you have to be. This is how originally you need to think. And I'll close this with one more example from a seldom seen but really fantastic Ang Lee film that once again Alexandre Desplat scored in the early part of his career using these same techniques. Muted strings, played very softly, in a large group, in a large space. Woodwinds used in a way that other composers were not currently using them. You know, sometimes don't even hear woodwinds in film scores. The sine pulse figures its way into this score as well. The augmented harmonies, and particularly this kind of oddball chromaticism. In this particular cue, I find very, I find its effect sort of dizzying and erotic. And again, this is a mock-up, so you can go back and listen to this on your own and hear the real deal. Yep, that's the same Alexandre Desplat who scored the Harry Potter films, who scored Godzilla, who's now a big A-list composer. That's how he got those gigs. That's how people became attracted to his work. And that's the way you need to think if you're going to make it in this business. Thanks so much for watching. We'll have more of this. I'm calling this series The Secrets of Their Success, and I'm going to try and deliver these lessons in as short a time span as I can because I know you all got things to do. Thank you so much.